Oi, oi, it's your boy, Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast, episode 211. Coming at you post-UFC 250, pre-worst UFC card ever assembled. And the reason we're not doing this on Monday is because I was holding out. I was like, can I do 2 podcasts this week with I versus Calvillo being the second podcast? Is that insulting to the intelligence of my audience? So, yeah, I don't know. We'll see what we do. But today I'm only going to be talking about UFC 250. And of course the news, because there's a lot going on at the moment. I think the big piece of news is just the ongoing labour relations issues that the UFC's having, which is pretty interesting because I feel like the fighters are starting to realise that, you know, this was the only sport back for a while, and it really drew attention to how it's not like a real sport. The UFC constantly presents itself as if it is a major sporting league, and it was sold for the price of a major sporting league, but it doesn't handle itself in the way that a major sporting league is forced to. And I think in many ways that's to the UFC's strength. They don't mind a bit of sleaze. They, you know, if, say, a major NBA team or NFL team, it came out that one of their utility players, you know, someone who's not like the superstar but is still a very important part of their very successful team, were having to work a second job, I think they'd be absolutely humiliated by that. The league, that is. Whereas the UFC has managed to get it to the point where you are supposed to expect it. You know, Brandon Royval crying about having to go back to work after beating a top 10 flyweight and getting ranked that weekend in the top 15. Yeah, that shouldn't be normal for any major sport. I think the comparison to boxing is always an interesting one because, you know, while low-level boxers get paid badly and are in a very similar situation, top-level boxers are paid far, far better than top-level MMA fighters, even though their sport is generally considered to be doing worse, without getting into the whole boxing's dying thing, because it's not, but, you know. And the other thing is that, like, the UFC is selling a product that is the UFC. It's not selling you John Jones. It's not selling you Amanda Nunez. You know, as much as we talk about star power and draws, the UFC has succeeded because it puts on, 8 to 12 fights a card? I think that the real truth is that if you are on the UFC's roster, as in employed for 2 or 3 fights or more, you shouldn't have money issues. Like, you should be able to live a healthy life, a normal life. Well, ideally the life of a pro athlete, because you are. And the other thing, of course, is that it links into the USADA stuff and the uniform stuff, the sponsorship stuff, because the whole reason, well, one of the reasons that the fighters are supposed to not be able to unionize is that they're independent contractors, which is something that you fall back on whenever you're asked to, like, provide healthcare or shit like that. But independent contractors aren't supposed to be forced to wear a uniform, and you know, the way that the UFC encroaches into their lives by drug testing them wherever they are is also, like, above and beyond what you expect for an independent contractor. The problem is, if you say that, people will go, well, he just wants to be able to do his drugs, you know? And to be honest, that was something that the UFC did to get, like, legitimacy, because, you know, the NFL and the NBA, well, I don't know about the NBA, the NFL, MLB, things like that, do not test as stringently as the UFC. The UFC did it to, like, try and look legit, and they shot themselves in the foot in the process. You would get better fighters and better fights and a higher quality of sport if you didn't drug test and you paid everyone a living wage. Instead, they're drug testing them like they're Olympic level athletes, and making many of them work second jobs or live, like, just above the poverty line. So it's pretty absurd. You know, they're trying to have it both ways. And really, the only thing that matters in any context is the revenue split. No one cares, or certainly the fighters shouldn't care, whether the UFC isn't as big as NFL or whatever, because it isn't. But they should, you know, if you cannot run your league paying the fighters 50% of the revenue, you're just fucking inept. That's, you know, I don't think they are. I think they could very easily run it with 50% of the revenue split going to the fighters, but no one's forced them to, so why would they? But to really catch you up on the details of it, Jorge Masvidal has come out and said that he needs more money. John Jones is saying he needs more money, having said that he'd fight Francis Ngannou for more money, and then the UFC said he was asking for ridiculous money, and then he said, I never asked for a figure, and it all got very, it was a bad look. And now Dana White's threatening to fight Dan Le Batard, some baseball journalist who then clapped back that he would never take the first offer like the fighters that Dana White exploits. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting time because you got so many guys. And the other thing, Conor McGregor faked retirement again this week because people were talking about other stuff. But you're getting to a point where enough guys are talking about this that it could be a big deal. I mean, if fighters let this go and don't do something, they are the stupidest sporting group on earth. And the thing that I never understood is that I understand people who believe they're going to be the next Conor McGregor because a good deal of self-belief is needed to succeed at any level in fighting. I don't expect people... you get the odd self-effacing guy who's like, oh, I'm just out here trying my best and I happen to be a top 15 guy in the world. But, most of them think that they're going to be champion at some point. And I understand that. And I get dozens of emails from people being like, thanks, Jack. Love your show. Watch out for me. I'm the next Conor McGregor. But even if you are the next Conor McGregor or you think you're going to be the next Conor McGregor, you train and rely... you train with and rely on other fighters who you obviously care deeply about, and they aren't all going to be world champions. Do you not want them to be able to make a living wage? I mean, realistically, you're in a fairly good position right now for fighters to do something about it. Whether it's called a union or called a players' association or whatever. If it's just a bunch of bros who agree not to fight until certain standards are met, you're in a pretty good position in terms of who the stars are, what's going on in the world right now, how the UFC is desperately trying to rush out these events. And I think it would be pretty... If you just got the right people, it would be pretty easy to get everyone else. For instance, 2 of the belts are currently at City Kickboxing. If you get Alexander Volkanovski and Israel Adesanya and their camp to get involved in some kind of effort to organise fighters, you've already got 2 of the, 6 belts, 7 belts that matter? If you get Amanda Nunez, you've got another 2 belts. Stipe is constantly falling out with the UFC, and he took the belt from DC the bootlicker, so that's one that you could definitely get on board or try to get on board. And of course trains with Jessica Ai, and if she gets on board, next week's card is thrown into disarray. But at any rate, anytime John Jones tweets anything about fighter pay or Jorge Masvidal tweets anything about fighter pay, all you have to do is reply unionize or STFU or organise, bitch. So aside from fighters gaining class consciousness, what else is going on this week? We had a load of interesting announcements, actually. I say interesting, some of them are interesting because you're like, fuck, that's the state of things now, and some of them are interesting because they're actually interesting. Like, actually interesting, Giri, what's his name? Prochazka? Giri, I've just written Giri here, is booked for his first UFC fight. Terrific. He was the rising light heavyweight champion. In his last one, he nuked CB Dollaway, and I mean, CB Dollaway, long way removed from his best days. But still, that's about the best guy Giri could have fought outside of the UFC and Bellator. And now he's in the UFC and he's going to be fighting Volkan Oezdemir. And as far as, debut matchups go, doesn't get much harder than that. I mean, Volkan Oezdemir, I gave him my most improved fighter last year. Sorry, my Slacky for best technical turnaround. And I gave him that ahead of Justin Gaethje. Or I might have given them both it. I might have given them a tie. But that seems like a cop-out on my part. Because Volkan Oezdemir had looked really, really good. That's a guy who could really give Giri a lot of problems in all areas. However, that is a lot nicer than Giri getting some wrestler who just 30-27s him in a 3-round decision. But good for Giri, wasting absolutely no time there. Oh, Volkan Özdemir's nickname is No Time. Oh, cool. On the weird end of the pile, it seems like light heavyweight is now... Well, no, heavyweight is becoming light heavyweight last year because we had Ovinson Prue go up because it's easier, but he lost. And we had, now we got Alexander Gustafsson unretiring, of course, to fight Fabricio Verdum. All right. I mean, I don't know what to make of that. That could be interesting. Actually, that could be interesting. Tough guy to take down. Boxes decently. Certainly boxes better than most heavyweights. And certainly boxes better than Fabricio Verdum. But, if you're leading with right uppercuts all the time and leaving your head out there on a platter, and you're relying on being a tall, long guy, and suddenly you're up with 6'4" fighters, rather than 6 foot even fighters, that's going to be interesting. Then we get into the sort of why portion of the announcements this week. Holloway versus Volkanovski 2 booked for UFC 251. I can understand why. I'm not feeling very hyped for it. If Holloway comes back and changes a load of stuff and fights a masterclass, I think we'd be on for one of the best 3-fight rivalries in the sport's history there, but the first fight was so lopsided and Max never got going. But, you should give him the rematch because he was a very impressive featherweight champion. Even though I think he only managed like 3 defenses of it, he still ran through basically everyone else in the division on the way up. And then the rest of the matchups announced this week basically just show that we're in this phase where the UFC's going business as usual, but the world is saying, no, it's really not. Because they've immediately rebooked Hannah Siffers and Ian Heinich to fight 3 weeks on from their last fight last week. And no one is clamouring for Hannah Siffers to fight again. No one is. I mean, I like Ian Heinich, and no one's clamouring for him to fight again immediately either. They booked Mike Perry versus Mickey Gall for the next, for what is that, the June card? Is that next week? But it's booked, and they're both, meme fighters. They booked Shogun versus Nogueira 3. And they announced it like they were really proud of it. And then, they were like, oh, they had a famous war in Pride. And then you're like, well, no, they also had a famous not war in the UFC like last year. But then you got some decent stuff in Whittaker versus Till for June 25th on Fight Island. And Brunson versus Shabazian. I said I wanted Shabazian versus Hall because Hall just lost his opponent. He'll be fairly near fighting shape. And also that's a great matchup between interesting strikers. But, Derek Brunson, I think they want him to serve up his chin on a platter to Shabazian. Oh, side note, Fight Island, we found out where that is this week. Globo announced that it's in Abu Dhabi, so it's not anywhere as exciting as we expected. Makes sense because they had Habib waiting in Abu Dhabi when they were trying to do Habib versus Tony. But it is literally, it's Yas Island or whatever it is. It's a little man-made spit, with 2 channels dug around it. It's the minimum you could possibly do to call something an island, as someone pointed out on my Twitter feed. I mean, yeah, it's fucking Abu Dhabi, I said that it would have been more convincing if they just used a raft made of dead migrant labour. But anyway, let's talk about UFC 250. Do you know what I'm not going to waste time talking about? Aside from Conor McGregor's retirement. Amanda Nunez versus Felicia Spencer. No one gives a shit. If you do, you have a very soft, smooth brain. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't interesting when they announced it. The fight wasn't particularly interesting. The whole selling point was Felicia Spencer is tough. And, all it really did was prove that Felicia Spencer could go 5 rounds with Amanda Nunez and Cyborg. I'm sure somehow Teep to the Junk will turn that into a selling point for Cyborg in Bellator. But, yeah, I mean, I wasn't super impressed by Amanda Nunez, to be honest. There was a nice inside low kick to 1-2, which was lovely. But aside from that, just fighting a bad fighter. And this is the thing, I said last week, WMMA GOAT is just world's tallest midget. Yeah, above 115. Jim Crochet said, if a woman's 135 pounds, she's a woman, and if she's 145 pounds, she's a place. That's a horrible sexist remark by Jim Crochet, but there is something above, somewhere between 115 and 125, there is a weight where women stop being able to fight good. I think it's like 121, 122, but yeah, everything above straw weight, just cut it. I mean, really, they got to do Valentina versus Amanda Nunez again. I think they need to build like a 129-pound division just so Valentina can have a second belt and pump up the title defenses that don't matter on her own behalf. But then we could do the third match, and honestly, I hope Amanda Nunez wins in an even more unconvincing and slow-paced fashion. So aside from that absolute joke of a division, what did we have going on? Also, if you find yourself even joking about how Amanda Nunez would beat up Henry Cejudo, just stop. Just stop. Because people will take it too far and we'll get to Ronda Rousey versus Floyd Mayweather, Cain Velasquez, whatever, 50% of male bantamweights again. And we'll be back at that very, very stupid place. So what was good on this card? We'll talk about the bantamweights because the bantamweights just owned this card. It was absolutely fantastic. Cody Gah Brent came back against Rafael Assunção, very tricky fighter, and I thought he did a great job. Are we talking new Cody? No, probably not. It was still a lot of moving in on straight lines. And the thing was that, one of the things that Pedro Munoz did so effectively against Cody Gah Brent was to counter the step. He'd establish a distance. Cody would start running at him, and then he'd slip his head and throw the overhand, or slip his head and headbutt Cody. Where you're in real trouble against Cody Gah Brent is if you let him stand close enough that he can hit you, with a small movement, because he's very, very quick. When he was close enough to, throw right-hand leads at Assunção here, he just beat him to the mark every time. When Assunção caught him with a really good right-hand counter, that was because they were fighting from a further distance, and Cody did that running 2-3 or left hook, right straight, or right straight, left hook, or whatever he does. You know, that running combination that knocked out like Almeida and countless other dudes, but it really is just like him running towards the guy. But I liked, you know, more kicks from Cody. The level change kick is always stupid when you see it. But, you know, lots of kicking, lots of calf kicks. Again, my immediate reaction to UFC 250 was to make a meme that just had that guy from Tiger King on his jet ski coming up to the camera, taking off his sunglasses and saying calf kicks. Calf kicks were a big deal in this one. Kicks generally are a great move for Cody. Still not a lot of jab. You know, he's got a really nice jab and he doesn't ever use it, which would be my number one thing if I was put in charge of reviving Cody Gah Brent's career. But the knockout is really what sold it to everyone. Sat back on the fence, ducked low. Assunção came in on the last second of the round, and Cody came up with a big right swing that hit him right on the chin. It had shades of KJ Nunez. In fact, he reminded me of a much less talented, less handsome KJ Nunez. But that, like, bend in half at the waist and come up with a straight-armed swing across the chin was a KJ Nunez special. And then he opened his mouth afterwards and just everyone went, oh, God, why are you such a fucking dummy? But I'm glad he's back on track. I'm happy for him. The only person I'm sad for here is Assunção, because he could have got a win that people actually would have cared about. And instead, he's probably going to be most famous now for being a highlight reel stoppage on Cody Gah Brent's comeback trail. Aljamain, all of these were really... That was second round, but all of these bantamweight fights did not go long. Aljamain Sterling versus Corey Sandhagen. The Filthy Casuals Guide curse lives on. I think we're past the point where people think that making a Filthy Casuals Guide is a pick, right? Because I used to get retards being like, oh, every time Jack picks someone in these Filthy Casual Guides. And I'm like, no, I just decided to talk about them because either people don't know them, or there's a lot of buzz and it'll get me a lot of hits, or I just found something interesting about their style. But I've made the good decision to talk about Aljamain Sterling at the end of that Filthy Casuals Guide and how good he was looking. Yeah, this was real quick. Official time 1:28, but I really like what he did. Sterling got on him right off the bat, and previously Sterling, in his like striking-centric performances, has been a kicker and standing out at range. This time he touched gloves, immediately got in Sandhagen's face, feinting and kicking, and the kicks were like the flashy kicks again that don't really do a lot. But what happened was that Cody immediately kicked back right next to the fence, and Sterling caught the kick, pulled the knee outside of him, and stepped in on an upper body clinch. And he had the underhook so high, he ratcheted it all the way up. He had Sandhagen almost bent over himself, and I think he knee tapped him down to the mat, and as Sandhagen bounced up, he got the back body lock, and his right foot was right into the... I think he stepped into the fence, which I saw Chase Hooper do later. Stepped into the chain link of the fence, stepped on with his other foot to put the hook in, and then took the back. And when they hit the mat, Aljamain immediately locked the body triangle, long guy for the weight class. I mean, both of them are, but long, skinny guys for the weight class, so both of them are probably going to be able to lock body triangles on each other. And he got to work applying the rear naked choke, and what happened was that Sandhagen, he at one point he reached down to try and release the body triangle by hand, and I thought, oh, that's where he's going to get caught, but he didn't get caught there. He got caught turning belly down, and he put his hands on the mat, and that was when Aljamain punched the choke in under his throat. It's really hard to get good guys from a static back control. I've just been watching Gordon Ryan's newest one, and he's got some really interesting... Basically, he tends to sneak the hand in as he's pulling the guy back onto him, just after they're starting to try and escape, and that's where he's caught a lot of guys. But getting the hand under the throat, very, very tricky, because you're going 2-on-2, 1-on-1 rather. You've got one hand for each of the opponent's hands. So that you'll see guys like the Danaher Death Squad bringing in the leg, trying to do stuff like that, like BJ Penn used to, Marcelo Garcia used to. But turning guys onto the front is always a good shout. You're seeing more guys come up on that far wrist control, like Diego Ferreira did against Anthony Pettis. But there was another one like that on this card, Gilbert Burns versus Evan Dunham. Got the back very quickly, tore his own toe off almost at some point in that, but got the back very quickly, did the broomstick, which is, putting that leg all the way through, or standing, you put the leg all the way through to the opponent, to the back of the opponent's other knee, and then you straighten the leg and sit them down into your lap. But he managed to catch Dunham, like, as he was trying to escape back control, he pulled him back on top to the other side and switched and got the hand under the chin as Dunham was thinking that he was getting away. I mean, rough night for Corey Sandhagen to end the fight that early. But again, that's what I always say. Like, if you've got a tough opponent, try and get him out there as quick as possible so that any time there's talk of a rematch, you could be like, but I did him in a minute or, 15 seconds or whatever. And then the other bantamweight fight on this card was Sean O'Malley's return against Eddie Wineland. We talked about this last week. Eddie Wineland, kind of a fragile guy at this point, does not defend himself well, which has always been the problem throughout his career. So it looked like they were setting... I mean, it was basically a guaranteed knockout one way or the other because Eddie Wineland hits extremely hard, but also takes very hard blows flush back on the other end. And I thought O'Malley looked great in this one. I remembered him for all the Southpaw open guard stuff he was doing against Sukmatath, which I think was his last one before he had the blood work irregularities. Oh no, he fought Kinoes. Oh no, that was his comeback. Yeah, Sukmatath was the last one before that. But I really like what he was doing as orthodox in this one and how he was switching stances. Clearly a very smart fighter who's been doing his homework on how to strike well. He's changed his stances in motion, off to one side or the other. He was changing stances on front snap kicks. He'd front snap kick with his rear leg and then put it down in front of him to be in the opposite stance. Using front kicks really well to the body. He kept showing fake back kicks. He feint the back kick by turning his lead shoulder across himself, but Wineland would return with a right hand swing, catch him in the shoulder and send him stumbling. Because Wineland was just buying all the feints and trying to counter off them, which worked out for the best in the end because O'Malley showed him it was a very slow. He was milling his hand showing slow fake punches like Rigondeaux does a lot of the time. And he showed a really slow uppercut and then popped a little 1-2, and Wineland was out of position. And the thing about Wineland is that his hands are always low, down by his nips, which is not the worst thing in the world if you have them. You can have not a physical guard and just have your mental guard up. Be aware of the opponent and have the reactions there to move your head and slip. But he stands straight up, and when he's not marching forward, he's not moving his head. Unless he's trying to slip, and he just does that off a static base. So he reacted a little bit to whatever O'Malley was doing before that, and O'Malley popped him with a 1-2 from orthodox, which is, it was interesting because that's the entire reason. Well, firstly, he tried a little 1-2 from southpaw earlier on, and Wineland countered him across the top with the right overhand cross counter, whatever you want to call it, but he clubbed him with it, and I was like, nice. But the entire reason to have your lead shoulder or lead hand in position to obstruct the path of the opponent's right hand is that the right hand is the thing that you've got to worry about from an orthodox fighter. And he wasn't in position, and O'Malley popped him with the right straight and just knocked him flat out. And that's the sort of frustrating thing about watching Eddie Wineland. He is someone who has not learned to box well, but does some very interesting stuff regardless. I think I said last week, I can't remember who I was describing last week, but I think it was when I was talking about Ricky Simone, having cool stuff like hooking off the jab, but then also not being able to get out of the way of a straight right hand off the bat. Having some high-level boxing stuff in one area and then lack of basics in another. So there was talk of O'Malley versus Gah Brent, which is a great shout for O'Malley because Gah Brent one fight off a 3-fight losing streak, but if you knock him out, and we know he's liable to get knocked out, and we know he's liable to get into exchanges with people and get and see red, because the Sunsau's not a big hitter. This would be the first big hitter he faced since Pedro Munoz and since his knockout loss streak. Sean O'Malley, if he fights Cody Garbrandt and knocks him out, which I give him a great shot at doing, he'd probably bounce right into title contention just off the name value of Garbrandt. What else was going on? Neil Magny versus Anthony Rocco Martin was the other one on the main card. And this wasn't a bad fight, but I would say it was like 2020 MMA in a nutshell. Both guys trading calf kicks, showing the jab, but not to a particularly effective degree, even though Magny's actually pretty good with his jab a lot of the time, but showing the jab lots and not doing a lot with it. And then both pushing the other to the fence, trying to shuck them past and get the back, but both also, when they're on the fence, showing the back to try and separate the hands and turn away. It was the only thing it was lacking for 2020 MMA was sitting on the fence and trying to fold the guy down on the far arm. Magny really came on in the third, and Martin really faded in the third, and that probably won him it. But I think that third round could have been, if you score rounds based on context, if those first two are a 10-9, then the third should probably have been a 10-8. But I think judges have a weird personal criteria of what they think a 10-8 should be. Because, like, in the main event, Amanda Nunez got all 10-9s on most of the cards, actually. I think she got one 10-8 on each of the cards. But, just, like, real reluctance to use 10-8s, even though they redefined the 10-8 just so they could say use more 10-8s. Alex Caceres versus Chase Hooper got a lot of talk around it. Alex Caceres is very much a journeyman at featherweight and bantamweight where he was. He's a guy who like wins one, loses one all the time in the UFC. He's got obvious talent, but not enough talent and not enough skill to be truly elite. But he was a good test for Chase Hooper, and really it did just show up that Chase Hooper, as great as he... I think that's the thing, you can be a savant grappler and really do well in MMA, but to be a savant striker and do well in MMA, you've at least got to be able to deal with the takedowns. And the takedowns is the portal where everyone gets stuck. Even if you're a great grappler, getting the guy to the ground is the hardest bit of it. Lots of people talking about how bad Chase Hooper's striking looked. Honestly, I thought he was doing the right thing. He looked like he knew what he was supposed to do, but he just wasn't practiced enough in it yet. He's showing feints, but they're not particularly convincing. And I think Rogan pointed that out on the broadcast. And he's throwing the 1-2 lots, which is, what everyone does in their shadowboxing and everyone does on the pads all the time. It's the thing that you're most practiced at. Problem is, he was doing the 1-2 and he was lingering after the 2. And you know how we always... Well, I haven't talked about it in a while, actually, but we always talk about closing the door on the 2. You throw they're both southpaws, can't remember. You throw your rear hand, you want to throw the lead hand again to get back on your bladed stance, to get back behind your lead shoulder. And he was throwing the rear straight and just lingering out there with his hips square. And Caceres had a field day. Caceres was landing that lead hook to the body, slip and lead hook to the body, which is just, you see that in high-level boxing because that's a really tight, high-level counter. But to do it in MMA, it helped him a lot that he had a very slow 1-2 coming at him and the guy wasn't doing anything after the 2. If you are going to throw the 2 and finish the combination there, things to do are like clutch, just move into the clinch, or push the guy away, or throw a low kick afterwards, or throw a front kick afterwards. That was a Gina Carano thing. She'd throw a combination and a front kick. I think Chase Hooper, even though there's a lot lacking in Chase Hooper's striking, he could have done a lot better if he'd been doing smarter things. So, he can throw a low kick. When he had Alex Caceres against the fence in his long stance, with the back foot on the fence, he should have been kicking that lead leg. Instead, he was coming in with 1-2. Caceres was slipping, hitting him with the body or in the head and moving out to the side. If he'd been kicking him in the legs, particularly calf kicks, he could have turned him around, hopped on his back, or at least started a grappling exchange. Caceres looked really good, taking the, separating the hands and always breaking away from the clinches along the fence, or letting Chase Hooper on his back, but then sliding him over the top because he didn't have the harness grip. There was a nice leg entanglement, actually, in the end of the first round from Chase Hooper, so he was game, he was going for it, but I don't think he's like a dangerous enough grappler from his back that the shoot into guard pull is an option, or a realistic option, and I don't think, when Caceres was in his closed guard, he just kept trying to suck his own dick. He was just throwing up high guard over and over again, and it wasn't really doing anything. And even the leg entanglement happened off he was he kept going into a headlock and showing his back and then rolling through his legs. He just didn't look very practiced at it. That's much more of a threat if you're like a Gary Tonnen or a Ryan Hall and you're very good at entangling legs and very good at finishing from leg entanglements and also very good at passing from leg entanglements, which is the value of the leg entanglement in MMA. Very few leg locks getting finished, but you can use them to get on top and start passing. But yeah, I'm not going to give Chase Hooper too hard a time. He's in a weird spot because he is very, very good. He's good enough to beat a lot of people, but he's not going to be beating the people who are good enough at stopping the takedowns, good enough at moving, and have the striking to hurt him while he's lingering in the standing portion of the fight. What else was good on this card? We talked about Herbert Burns, Manyfield versus Clark, Beh, Pitolo versus Bird, all right, Cody Stamann, I thought, did a really good job against Brian. Both of them were good. I said that would be a good fight, and both of them were good. Cody Stamann just lost his brother. I thought that was one of his better performances, and then his post-fight interview was heartbreaking. Both him, he was on the edge of tears, and Joe Rogan was on the edge of tears too. It's kind of like Walt Harris the other week. Something horrible happens, you got to get back to work. And, it'll take your mind off it for a little bit, maybe, but then afterwards you're immediately going to remember it. Ian Heinich, my boy. I joked last week if Dope Escapes could knock people out, Ian Heinisch would be a superstar. But this time he actually came out and knocked the dude out. And my reaction was, he didn't do any sick Granbys or switches or anything, because Jeremy Michette didn't get him to the ground or even come close. Just like, was it an overhand left, overhand right, whatever. It wasn't particularly elite level striking, but it was good to see him get a knockout, because a lot of I criticised him last week, a lot of the stuff he does is like anti-grappling, but then he doesn't score any points or do any damage because his striking is just meat and potatoes a lot of the time. Looking real thick. I think he was training in Thailand recently, wasn't he? But good for him, and he's got another match in like 2 weeks now, so that'll be great. Someone's got to do it, because Brian Kelleher and Hannah Siffers have both tried to take multiple fights in the quarantine period, and both of them have lost one of them. And Kevin Holland got pulled from his. And then on the undercard, Alex Perez versus Jussier Formiga. I mean, Jussier Formiga is tough as nails. Alex Perez stopped him with calf kicks again. I mean, fucking calf kicks. I've got a question about calf kicks later, so we'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, dude, deal with calf kicks. And both of these guys were hooking off the jab, doing some cool stuff. It was a good fight, and I like Alex Perez a lot. But Formiga has been top 3 forever, basically. So to stop him is really impressive. Not a bad night of fights. I mean, not a pay-per-view worthy night of fights, I don't think, but people were willing to pay for Ronda Rousey versus Betch Kohea. And I think there are people who are at that level of dummy or simp for Amanda Nunez at this point. Right, let's answer a couple of questions before we wrap up. Dear Jack Slack, before I begin, I would like to say that I am now a firm believer in the Filthy Casuals curse. From now on, I will bet against any subject featured in the Filthy Casuals guide. If I ever lose, I would like you to know that I will hold you legally liable for any and all financial damages I suffer should the subject in any future guide win. On a more serious note, I have noticed the low calf kick being used a lot in this weekend's fights. I'm talking about UFC 250 and not that shit show of a card next week. With that in mind, are there any counters to the low calf kick, and what fighters do you think are best equipped to deal with this? One potential example of a counter that comes to mind is the Gyakuzuki used by Machida. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this. Best regards, and a sunset forever in our hearts, from Matt. The Gyakuzuki up the centre, right straight up the centre, whatever you would call it. Stepping up the centre with the rear hand straight, and we can get into the differences between a right straight in boxing and a Gyakuzuki reverse punch in karate, but it doesn't really matter. It's stepping up the middle with the rear straight or the rear overhand is the best counter to any low kick, but you are a little bit more... It's a lot easier to do against a low kick to the thigh because they're going to be closer into you. And also because you're not taking it on like the middle of your shin, which can still, it can still sweep your foot out even if you're stepping in onto it. The calf kick and counters, I think it needs to be treated in a similar way to the low line side kick because that's the range we're talking about. You're dealing with the longest weapon nearest target thing again. The side kick more because they can project it out of the front of their stance, or the side of their stance, right? Really, completely side on as far as possible. The calf kick because their lead foot is anchored and they're swinging around that to throw a fairly long kick at the nearest target to them. But I think, it is not something... I mean, you can check a calf kick, but the problem with the calf kick generally is that because it's aiming below the knee, you can't pick up your leg to check and put the knee and top portion of the shin, which are the hard bits, in the path of the kick. If a guy's throwing a calf kick and you pick your leg up, what happens is that they just kick through at the lowest portion of your shin, which is the thinner bit of your leg and probably less conditioned, and it slaps through because it's just hanging in the air. What's a great one for that? Jeremy Stephens versus Gilbert Melendez. Gilbert Melendez is picking his leg up to check, but Jeremy Stephens is just kicking through at like foot level, ankle level, in the check. And it's just hanging there in the air, so, he'll just go straight through. And there's no way for you to get the top portion of your shin and your knee lower from your stance, so it's a tricky one to deal with checking wise. I don't think there is. I mean, maybe you could try that Carlos Condit on back check where you turn your knee inwards, pick your foot up, and use bring your heel to your butt and use your foot to block the kick. But there's no real point. Picking the leg up, I think any real counter to the calf kick, aside from stepping in and bracing it, which is hit and miss because you're going so low on the leg that you're basically sweeping the foot out. I think basically any response to the calf kick is going to involve taking the leg away, which is something that was always going to work for side kicks to the lead leg and, to an extent, oblique kicks. But side kicks to the lead leg it works wonderfully on. And guys still haven't picked up on that. Amanda Nunez did it to Holly Holm. She withdrew her leg from the side kick and then threw back a high kick on the open side. And Israel Adesanya did it against Robert Whittaker a couple of times, and Robert Whittaker really got freaked out by that when he was throwing these side kicks. He was like, uh-oh, because the high kick was always coming back on the side that he was facing. I think for calf kicks, withdraw the leg into the stance, or at the very least, use like the check that, who was it? Malapet, the diamond. He used to do his check for low kicks. He would bring his heel towards his butt and point his knee out into the kick. So he was basically like putting his knee towards the path of the kick, but taking his leg, like his lower leg, away from it. I think pulling your heel to your butt and turning the knee out is a good answer. But again, high stance stuff. The reason the calf kick works is because guys are using longer stances because they're getting into boxing and karate and things like that. High stance is obviously prevalent in Muay Thai because the low kick is an issue and you're dealing with only kicking and punching, you're dealing with only striking. Yeah, basically the more guys come to use boxing and the jab, the more they're going to be presenting that leg. It's kind of, I don't think there's ever going to be a right style for MMA. There's going to be trends and stuff, but it's like in boxing, there are ways to basically to take away an awful lot of the legal targets. In MMA, you can't even start. You're going to have to be reacting to stuff all the time on multiple levels of the body. And however you choose to stand, you're just going to have to accept that there are going to be a lot of openings in it, for the opponent. Which is why distance management has always been one of my key points in defense for MMA, footwork and stuff. But again, that tends to rely on like a longer stance to get in and out. And that is an issue if the guy starts timing the calf kicks. But withdrawing the leg into the stance is the go-to defense for any form of low kick at this point. Checking kicks really only for high low kicks, or rather traditional low kicks. Unless someone can work out a way of picking up the calf kick and drawing it up into a takedown or falling onto it into a single leg, which I'm thinking about now because I'm doing some Sakuraba stuff again. Well, I'm always working on this Sakuraba stuff and just not releasing it. But Sakuraba used to like low kick the guy to get the low kick coming back, and as they low kicked, he'd just drop on it for like a low single. But no, I don't think you can do that with a calf kick. The easiest thing, or the most obvious thing, is just to retract your leg and return with a counter. I mean, I've always loved retracting the leg and throwing the high kick to whatever the open side is. So if you're orthodox and the opponent's orthodox, you would and they throw a right low kick, right calf kick, whatever, you retract your left leg into your stance and you throw the right high kick. Or you retract your left leg into your stance and you wait for him to be pulling back onto his stance and then you throw the left high kick. You want to be timing whatever side is the open side. Because it's about the easiest shot at a high kick you're going to get, and that'll not only maybe put the guy off low kicking or low kicking, but you've got a good chance of kicking him in the head because there aren't an awful lot of opportunities to do that for free in MMA without getting your leg caught. Anyway, I reckon that'll do us for today. We'll try and be back later in the week, depending on how motivated I'm feeling by this Cavilio card. I might just do some other stuff for the Patreon boys instead. I will see how the mood strikes me. But I hope you're staying sane in these weird-ass times. And solidarity to all MMA fighters who are moaning about their pay. I'm your boy Jack Slack. If you want to get in on the Patreon stuff, support the podcast, get extra things, sign up to the Patreon. In fact, if you haven't listened to the last couple of Slacky's film rooms, they're still up there. And I think all the UFC fights are still up and stuff, so that should be fun. And we did our Gilbert Burns versus Tyron Woodley post-fight last Monday. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgoneby@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Players Associations bless.